We are done. The Elite Eight. We have a Final Four set. This is Locked On Bracket Mayhem. I am Josh Neighbors, the host of Locked On Big 12. Joining me tonight, Ben Stevens, the host of Locked On Big 10, and also Brian Brown, the host of Locked On Utes. Guys, we had 4 Elite Eight games over the course of the last 2 days, and normally we have to wait a full week to the Final Four. We have only 5 days or 4 or 5 days away now. But we just watched UCLA and Michigan in what we described before as one of the more entertaining bad games that you will see. I'll go to Brian first. Brian, it was looking bad for the Pac-12 here in this kind of stretch. Oregon State did not look good yesterday. We'll get to that in a second. USC got dogged tonight, and then UCLA got off to a rough start. But Johnny Juzang had something to say about the Bruins' chance to go to the Final Four. Tremendous win for them tonight over number 1 seed Michigan.
I was nervous that I'd put the jinx on the Pac-12 in this run for the money that they're making this year by choosing against every single team. I thought of all the teams, it was least likely that UCLA was the one that was going to escape with a win. And here they are, the one that makes the Final Four. And like you said, it was Johnny Juzang down the stretch that really marks the team down there. And this was the epitome of a Mick Cronin team, right? Tough defense, slow the game down, make it as absolutely ugly as possible, because I think that's the only way that UCLA could really hang with Michigan, and they escaped with a win. But goodness, didn't they give Michigan plenty of chances to try and snatch it away?
Yeah, there were plenty of opportunities. And Ben, one thing I want to say for this is that I thought Michigan would be KO'd a lot earlier without Isaiah Livers. I think the fact they found some kind of form without him speaks to how good the coaching was this year, and just kind of speaks to the quality of the team. So while they lost tonight, I think they showed a lot more than people thought they would without Isaiah Livers.
Josh, I actually thought Michigan had the makeup of a team that even without their second leading scorer, one of their veteran leaders, would be okay having that absence in this NCAA tournament because they play such a team brand of basketball. We saw that in the first 3 games in the Big Dance when they assisted on 60 of their 83 made field goals and Mike Smith in full control of that offense. We did not see that against UCLA tonight. I thought this was one of the games where they missed Isaiah Livers the most. I think Franz Wagner looked incredibly out of sorts, even the offense in general at times without Mike Smith on the floor. Eli Brooks looked a little disjointed. I think this is where they missed Isaiah Livers and his ability to create offense on his own. I thought they got almost a little too reliant on going down to the block to Hunter Dickinson, who struggled to go to his right pretty much the entirety of the game. So it was an interesting game plan, a disjointed Michigan offense, a really ugly game that ended in 100 total points between the two teams, both teams under 1 point per possession, according to Kenneth Pomeroy. So an ugly game and not the way Michigan fans wanted this season to end.
Yeah, not at all. But, you look at this game, this was not what we expected. I mean, 2 teams that have found ways to score throughout the course of the tournament. And, Brian, I actually thought Hunter Dickinson was going to be a big problem for them. I think the line that we're going to look at for the Gonzaga versus UCLA game is so high because Vegas is concerned with how will UCLA guard Drew Timme. And I thought tonight, though, they got a big man in Hunter Dickinson, and they probably handled him pretty well for the most part.
Yeah, they did. And I think a lot of it is that they play good team defense for the most part. And you see guys that rotate well. Jaime Jacquez has been kind of the shooter for the team, but he described himself as an all-everything guy. And he really does do a little bit, even though he doesn't look like he's the most athletic defender. You've got Cody Riley down low, who's done a good job, even though he's a little bit undersized. He uses his strength to his advantage. And it's going to be interesting how that matches up against Timme from Gonzaga. And the other part of it, too, is that Gonzaga just has so many playmakers on the floor that you have to wonder if UCLA is going to be able to stay in those rotations and stay with guys as they whip that ball around. And also, who do you use to guard Jalen Suggs? I think Tiger Campbell's one of their better defenders, but that's a big-time size matchup and athletically as well. And let's be honest, nobody's really been able to guard Suggs all year. So it's just a very difficult task for UCLA, but so was making the NCAA tournament. And
right.
Here they are in the Final Four.
Ben, this was a really interesting matchup for one reason I thought was, the entire year, I think Juwan Howard he's going to win National Coach of the Year, in my opinion. And then we had also Mick Cronin, who's probably been doing the best coaching job in the last month of the season. I think there is something to be said that we should appreciate what each one of these coaches has done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Nick Cronin has taken some of that Midwest feistiness and brought it out to Hollywood and Westwood, and you can see that in the way his team plays. UCLA has won games late in this NCAA tournament. You go back to the first four when they were down 5 with 90 seconds left against another team from the state of Michigan and the Spartans of Michigan State, and they found a way to force that game into overtime and exploded in overtime and won that game. You could look at the same way when they battled with Alabama late in that second half to get into overtime. Yes, it was an Alabama tying 3 at the buzzer that forced it into that extra session, but then UCLA in that overtime session was the far superior team. And today against Michigan really was able to battle late and win games and not allow Michigan to get all that many quality looks, at least the way they wanted to, although you could argue Franz Wagner, a very quality look. You could argue that Mike Smith, a very quality look, but UCLA has battled. They've been gritty, and there's a reason they have gone from the first 4 to the final 4. All credit to them. I've been down on UCLA, even heading into the NCAA tournament, questioning their qualifications for making the big dance. And every step along the way, they have made me put my foot in my mouth. And here we are again, knocking out the final Big Ten team from the NCAA tournament and clinching a berth in the final 4. All credit to Mick Cronin. Juwan Howard did a great job adapting without his player in Isaiah Livers and finding a team formula that worked. I thought they had a great blueprint against Florida State. Tonight, struggled a little bit against UCLA. And again, I think they were a little too reliant on Hunter Dickinson in that second half. I think they needed to space the floor a little bit, and I think it cost them at the end. But overall, a great year for Juwan Howard in his second year to get an undermanned Michigan team even to the Elite Eight.
The other game tonight, I was excited to see. I thought it actually had a chance to be close. It was not. Gonzaga put the press on, literally and figuratively, in the beginning of the game, and they turned over USC and got up early and never looked back. This was a game, Brian, I thought could be close. I thought the length of Evan Mobley would be something that would be difficult to handle. The length of all of USC. Drew Timme must have handed Evan Mobley maybe his most humbling experience in his basketball career tonight, I think.
I think we saw the inexperience with Evan Mobley, and for sure the talent is there. And at times he looks like a 7-footer that really doesn't even know how good he is at basketball because the athletic ability is just so superior. But this USC team always kind of relied on talent throughout the year. I won't say that they coasted because it's a good basketball team. They play good defense. They play mostly pretty well together, and I think the parts kind of fit together. They really do have that massive front court, and I think that's really gotten them most of this distance. And then they hit just an absolute buzzsaw with Gonzaga, and they just bulldogged them all up and down the court. And Gonzaga played like a team that they've been all year. They are possessed. They won a title. This team wants to prove how good they are. Jalen Suggs seems like the perfect kind of 5-star fit for this program. And you add that kind of talent to the guys like Corey Kispert and Timme and everybody else on this roster, Ayayi, it just – and it's just, I mean, the crazy part about it is they have so much depth and they play so well together and they can execute so many different things. And I think it's a major credit to Mark Few that he made USC look silly and they didn't know how to deal with the pressure and they never really recovered. And that's as much the mental game as it is the physical one.
Yeah, and Ben, one sneaky storyline here is that Corey Kispert hasn't shot the ball very well this tournament so far. But it really hasn't mattered, has it?
Not at all. I mean, he was not great tonight, and Gonzaga was still giving it to USC across the board. I mean, USC came into this game, and the only shot they had, the reason people thought the Trojans might present a challenge to Gonzaga was because of that defense, the zone defense or man-to-man defense, however you want to categorize it, the 5th best defense in terms of the efficiency ratings in all of college basketball. And Gonzaga was so efficient tonight, even without Corey Kispert. Jalen Suggs, a near triple-double. Drew Timme took over that game as well. And this Gonzaga team ranks first in offensive efficiency, first in effective field goal percentage, first in 2-point field goal percentage. They are just great across the board, and now on the precipice of history, trying to become the first undefeated national champions since Indiana in 1976. They are a perfect 30-0 heading into the Final Four, and I don't really see who's knocking them off at this moment. Gonzaga's best is just far superior to anybody in college basketball.
The one team that wants to have something to say about that is Baylor. They got by Arkansas last night, well, whatever it is now. And the late games, guys, the 10 p.m. Eastern start times, the East Coasters among us, oh my God, it's killing us. But no, Baylor ends up getting by last night over Arkansas by 9. And the key for this game was their defense from the get-go was in top form. The thing that Gonzaga and Baylor both do very well is that when you make mistakes, they cash in. almost every single time. And so, Brian, I'll go to you first on this one. We're almost at a spot now where it feels like Baylor, Gonzaga, the collision course that we kind of were supposed to have a couple months ago.
It's not the football guy who's supposed to pick this, right? And the guy who played football in college, being me, should have no idea what college basketball should do. But those were my two picks. And I think sometimes it is the teams that look the best that do end up marching the way, especially with this year and COVID and everything that's been throwing at everybody. But we talked on the last show about how Moses Moody had to come out firing for Arkansas. And he didn't. He missed, 2 for 10, 0 for 4 from 3. And they really never were able to generate any kind of momentum against Baylor. And like you said, they're one of those programs and one of those teams that when they get on top of you and they just suck the life out of you, that's it. Like it is the slow, steady burn of making every mistake you make pay. And then, they're on their way to the Final Four.
And Ben, much like Gonzaga, we mentioned Corey Kispert hasn't been playing well. Last night, Davion Mitchell's in foul trouble. Well, Jared Butler and Maceo Teague were both there to pick up the slack. I mean, I think Davion was plus 16 because they were up 16 about in the first 8 minutes of the game. Gets foul number 2, has to go to the bench, and they still weathered that storm. And that Arkansas run, we know Musselman's teams. They're Nevada, Arkansas. They get down double digits, and then they come back. And it's, can you weather that storm? And I never felt that nervous. Even when it got down to 4, still felt like Baylor was in control. It was like they knew what they were up against and they knew how to handle it. And that's kind of the mark of a great team, isn't it?
I completely agree with you. I think really good teams have an ability to sustain runs from their opponents. They might allow their opponent to get close, but they always have an answer when it comes down to it. And I think we saw that last night in Baylor's talented wings. Davion Mitchell, not great scoring the ball last night, but was tremendous defensively against those Arkansas perimeter players as well. And Maceo Teague picked up the slack, 22 points, leading the way, 50% from the field. And I think it was encouraging for Baylor to start shooting the ball better from 3 again. They really struggled against Villanova in the Sweet 16, just 3 of 19 from deep. Last night, 8 of 15. They were the best three-point shooting team in the country coming into this weekend. So for them, that is a huge portion of their game. In any great team, as we mentioned, whether it's Gonzaga, who doesn't make any mistakes, and if you do, they take advantage. Baylor is the same exact way, turning Arkansas over 15 times on Monday night and really being able to withstand any run Arkansas made. I was watching that game, and every time it got to 6 or 8 or even 4, like you mentioned, Josh, I was never too worried because I thought that would be the absolute precipice of where Arkansas was able to get in that game. I thought Baylor would hold on to the lead for pretty much all 40 minutes, and we saw that out of the Baylor Bears. And that defense, by the way, Josh Neighbors, looks a lot more like it did pre-COVID pause than it did in the month of March.
Well, it's a big thing to mention. Matthew Meyer talked about this a lot, and he said, look, we practiced once since the COVID break until the end of the Big 12 tournament. And he said that loss to Oklahoma State was probably the best thing for them. Talked about how aggressive their practices were, and they looked like that. And I love the second half against Villanova. They were not making threes. They drove the ball into the paint, and they took it right at a bigger team than them and did very well. Let's talk about the team they're going to play. Houston gets an ugly – I'm not going to say it's awful, but an ugly win, 67-61 over Oregon State. It felt like Oregon State had no business being in that game, and they were within a possession there towards the back end. Brian, I mean, regardless of this result, Wayne Tinkle deserves so much credit because Corvallis, not a place easy to win in football or basketball, and he took a team to the Elite Eight. This was very impressive, but they came up just short in this one.
They did, and it was a team that was really on the rise in the Pac-12 at the end of the year, winning 6-7, and then storming their way into the tournament through the actual Pac-12 tournament. They weren't on anybody's radar, and they found some guys through the portal. Waratha Letitia is a guy that stepped up and has really developed as the year came along, and he struggled against Houston. We thought that might happen. They didn't really get the scoring that they were expecting. Jaron Lucas struggled. Just not a great shooting night altogether from Oregon State, as they were only 37% from 3. And that Houston team is just ferocious, and they still gave them opportunities at the end of the game. And I think that's the hallmark of the really great teams, is when you can take advantage of those late game opportunities. We saw that Michigan struggled with that tonight. Oregon State did the same thing when Houston gave them a few chances to get back into it, and they just couldn't overcome it. And it did. For the Beavers, it felt like this was inevitable. But you mentioned Wayne Tinkle, like the way that he's built up this program and got them competitive, and this will springboard him and the rest of his program forward. And he's a guy who deserves it. He's worked and grinded up there in Corvallis. And like you said, it is a tough place to win, but they're starting to see a lot of success with he and Jonathan Smith on the football side of things.
Yeah, and Ben, I know people in Big Ten country have some feelings about Kelvin Samson. But this team, Brian said it, ferocious. The way they attacked the glass, they knew exactly what to do to zones. Zones, there's no box out assignments, right? Because guys, the way it works is you're in a zone. And so they knew that, and they attacked the glass. Double-digit offensive boards in both their last two games against Syracuse and then against Oregon State. They're not fancy, but they know how to be ferocious, like Brian talked about. And that showed up, and they've earned this Final Four trip.
Houston had 19 offensive rebounds against Oregon State last night. Their best offense, because really shooting the ball is not the Cougars' strength, is getting those misses and having a second or third or fourth chance on every single time they take a trip down the floor. And that defense is really their calling card. And Kelvin Samson said it himself. Even when we know we're going to struggle offensively, we can rely on that defense. The 61 ugly points that Oregon State put up last night against the Cougars, the high that any opponent has scored in the 4 games against Houston in the NCAA tournament. They have been outstanding defensively, clamping Syracuse to 46, Rutgers to 60, and Cleveland State in the opening round to 56. They have been so good defensively. That is the calling card for Houston. It might benefit them against Baylor, but I just don't see the offense being enough against the Baylor Bears, and I know we'll dive into some of those Final Four matchups here in just a minute.
Let's do it right now, guys. Let's talk about it. We got 2 Final Four games right here, and so Houston and Baylor. And Ben, you bring up a great point, because Houston feels a little bit like Baylor, Diet Baylor, kind of in a way. They're aggressive, they pressure you, and for them, they want to put the onus on you. The same way Baylor did against Arkansas, and Arkansas couldn't stand up to it late in that game last night. Had chances, but couldn't do it. Houston also did the same thing against Oregon State. Gave them chances, they couldn't do it. So this line is 5. It feels really low to me. It feels really, really low. Ben, I'll go to you first. This feels, the way Baylor's playing right now, like this is the easiest bet, in the tournament, it feels like at this point in time.
I completely agree with you. Listen, I've been very down on Houston this entire NCAA tournament because of the lack of offensive production. I thought Rutgers was going to upset them in the round of 32, and I hold on to this day with the Big Ten ties in my heart. Rutgers should have won that game up 9 with under 5 minutes left and didn't attempt a single free throw all the second half and decided to play just halt ball, all standing around the perimeter. Terrible execution late game for Rutgers against Houston. But Houston hasn't really impressed me offensively. And when you're playing a team as complete as Baylor on both ends of the floor, you can't just lock down defensively because Baylor has way too much talent. Dejan Jarreau for Houston has been incredible, and he has taken the leading scorer away in the first 4 games for Houston in this NCAA tournament. But okay, who are you going to take away? Jared Butler? All right, Maceo Teague and Davion Mitchell. They'll have good games. Okay, you want to take away Davion Mitchell? Jared Butler and Maceo Teague will go off. So I think there's too much talent for Baylor here to just be completely nullified by this Houston Cougars team. And I think 5 points is not nearly enough. But hey, the smartest mind in all of college basketball, Kenneth Pomeroy, predicts this game right now. Baylor only winning by 1, 72-71. So maybe there's some value there. I don't see it. I think Baylor could easily win by double digits.
I'm with you. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I don't know what the odds makers see in this one in keeping that line so close. And I'm not going to argue with Ken Pomeroy, especially being that he is a Utah resident. But this does feel like a game that does tip in Baylor's favor without a doubt. They just have so many weapons. And Houston beats you with toughness and grit, and that can only get you so far. They've got to shoot lights out in order to beat Baylor, and I don't know how you do that. Like Baylor they're built to stop you, and when it comes to kind of the similar styles of play and everything like that, I think it's usually the more athletic, the more talented team that wins out in those, and that in my mind is without a doubt Baylor.
Yeah, this is a matchup for Baylor that's pretty good. The one bugaboo for Baylor is if you've got a tall guy, and I literally mean just tall guy, it's a problem because Mark Vital and Flo Thamba have some issues with that. Houston doesn't have a whole lot of size. They've got aggression and some moderate height, but not something that, try to out-tough Mark Vital. You can't. So I like Baylor's chances in this game from that perspective. If they mind their P's and Q's, which I'm sure with a few days of prep, they'll be able to. This is a veteran team, and they will not, overlook anything coming to this game. A whole lot of Quentin Grimes on second and third chances was their offense for Houston against the zone. And I don't see that working a whole lot. Let's go to the next game, guys. So I'm saying I'm with you guys on this one. All right, UCLA Gonzaga, man. 13.5, like, hell yeah. Really glad UCLA is here. But Gonzaga, I mean, Drew Timmy's like the player of the tournament so far, right, Ben? I mean, Drew Timmy is the most outstanding player in the 2021 NCAA tournament so far.
That's your best value if you're going to bet on Gonzaga. Go to the most outstanding player prop odds on betonline.ag and take Drew Timmy or Corey Kispert or Jalen Suggs, but it's going to be Drew Timmy right now. And if you want value on Gonzaga, there you go. Minus 13.5 in my mind is not a high enough number against UCLA. Gonzaga can play their B+ game and still win this game, I think, by 18. Although UCLA has been incredible, Gonzaga is another step and leap and bound in front of everybody that UCLA has seen up until this point. And if Gonzaga controls the pace of the game because they want to play faster, that will not be in UCLA's favor. They have one of the slowest tempos in all of college basketball, 337th out of 357 teams. Gonzaga is fast, efficient, up-tempo. Everything you can say good about Gonzaga, it lives up to that billing. I would think Gonzaga, and this is going to get bet up a little bit, is probably going to close closer to 15 and a half by the time we get to tip on Saturday night. But I think Gonzaga still would have some coverage there, and I would still pick Gonzaga. And the best margin might be, though, if this game, in-game live betting, you have an opportunity and UCLA gets off to a good start, that might be your best chance to grab Gonzaga because that's going to be a lot of points. But even in that, I would still take Gonzaga.
Brian, what is UCLA's path to? I'm not even going to say victory. I'm going to say coming close because
respectability.
Path to victory is generous. Yeah. I feel like. What do you think, Brian?
Flying in Bill Walton, that's going to be your best bet at this point. Yeah. Maybe Kareem Abdul-Jabbar will come out, just whatever Westwood magic you can get into this game and hope that either Gonzaga finally has an off night for the first time all tournament or there's some sort of spirit of John Wooden that shows up to get the Bruins in gear. Because they're going to struggle. That's the bottom line. These are two conflicting styles, and I don't know that UCLA has the depth to keep up with a team like Gonzaga. I don't know that they have the size either. These are things that I've watched UCLA play all year long. This is a very strong defensive fundamental team, which is very different for UCLA. But, for example, if Johnny Juzang gets into foul trouble, it's a struggle, and there's no way that they can keep up with Gonzaga if he ends up on the bench, and we've seen him do that in a couple games this tournament.
Also, Josh, just to jump in real quick,
good.
Johnny Juzang has had some right ankle issues. We saw him miss some time against Michigan State, against Michigan on Tuesday night as well. I do want to say the only shot Gonzaga has of losing to Michigan State or even having that game be close, Johnny Juzang is going to have to make 33 pointers. I mean, scored probably 75 points for Gonzaga and UCLA to be tight. One final betting trend as you approach the Final Four, 12 games between the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. 9 of those went under the total. One of those 3 games that went over was the overtime game between Alabama and UCLA. So unders are the trends so far in this NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, I'm totally there with you. Guys, it looks we're all picking Gonzaga and Baylor. We're getting the game that we're supposed to get. I believe it was back in Indianapolis. Ironically enough, Indianapolis back in November and December, or whenever it was. That's where we're heading. Want to thank Ross Jackson, first of all, our producer. Excellent job tonight. Thank you, Ross. We love you so much. Heart. Also, Locked On Big 12, Locked On Big 10, which is where Ben Stevens is, Locked On Utes, which is where Brian is. And also, we've got Locked On Zags, which is new to the Locked On Podcast Network. We've also Garrett Ross as well of Locked On Baylor. Stephen Carr, Locked On Zags, Garrett Ross, Locked On Baylor. Want to thank our friends at Bet Online getting those lines up wicked fast for us tonight on the show. We will see you guys after the Final Four games have happened in some variation. We will have a show for you, some reaction coming up for the national championship game, some review of the Final Four, some preview of the national championship game. Ben, Brian, this was awesome, man. Always good seeing you guys.
Nothing better than getting to talk ball with you guys, especially after some basketball. I mean, that's what it was, right? I think.
Not great basketball, but basketball, yeah. We had hoops.
Hey, the Big Ten is done. I just get to be a fan of the NCAA tournament. So all is good.